Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this little bit of Hebrew as we continue in the book of Daniel. We're in chapter 10, picking up with verse 4. And what you're seeing on your screen is the JPS page, Jewish Publication Society. And so it has the Hebrew on the right side and, of course, the English on the left side. And so reading the English on verse 4, it says, "And in the fourth and 20th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Tigris." Now, again, we're going through Daniel's dream and vision, however he is explaining it, trying to understand what is the relevance of, what he's seeing visually, what he's experiencing, what he's maybe hearing and feeling, um, has to be very challenging to be put into words. So, we're picking up a lot of, you know, descriptions that are challenging for us to comprehend. But then we get to verse 4, and he feels it necessary to describe the day, um, the month, and where he's at, that he's by the side of the great river. And so, okay, you just wonder what this is all playing into. What's the significance of a verse that, you know, by first inclination, I would just pass over it and jump to verse 5 where the vision is happening and he starts describing the vision. But that's the beauty of um, having access to the Hebrew language, that we can stop and say, okay, there's some meaning here. There's something that Daniel felt was necessary for us to know where he was at. And this was kind of impressed upon me yesterday as I went down to Milwaukee to pick my wife up at the airport. I left early on purpose, and I wanted to stop at a coffee shop right near the airport. Um, and they specialize in coffee from the land of Yemen, special um, flavor type of coffee bean that's unique to that area. That, of course, they feel it's the best in the world. And I knew it was close to the airport. I could go have a cup of this Yemenite coffee, try it, sit in the coffee shop. I'll be working on my lesson here as I'm presenting it today. And, it just seemed like a nice experience before I had to go to the airport. So I get into the coffee shop and I get my coffee and I sit down and I take out my study material, open up to the book of Daniel, and suddenly I felt just very impressed to look around me. And I had been aware that it was a very nice coffee shop. I felt warm and welcomed, but I look up and here was um, a book rack with the Quran in it. I looked to the other table and there was a lady in typical Middle Eastern Islamic Muslim dress. Looked like she was having a study with someone who was not dressed the same way. And I realized, wow, I'm in the middle of a Palestinian coffee shop. And the irony of it just kind of hit me that here I am studying Hebrew in the middle of a Palestinian coffee shop. Obviously, no one knew what I was reading or what I was studying. And I felt like, well, maybe I was letting my light shine there in some way. But as I'm reading verse 4, I started to think, okay, what did Daniel feel in the midst of Babylon trying to serve the one true God? And is there something in this verse? I was just intrigued by this verse that maybe there was something there that had some meaning. And so, as I started going through this study and unpacking it, I noticed a couple things. First thing I noticed is that as I started sharing with you that I'm learning the cantillation, or the musical notes that are in every verse, that allows a person to chant this Hebrew, and it is a beautiful aid to memorization. It's a beautiful aid also to understanding some nuances of the verse. The first part of this verse has a very non-melodic, very kind of monotonous sound to it. And so I'll try to chant that for you so you can kind of get the feeling of it. So we're starting at verse 4, kind of where my cursor is, um, and it would go Uva Yom Esrim Be'arba'ah LaChodesh Harishon. And that takes us to this first part here where it says basically it's translated in the fourth and 20th day of the first month. Very normal um, type of cantillation. You see it all through the Bible. But then we get to this next part where it talks about, and I was standing by the side of the great river, which is Tigris, and the cantillation changes. It becomes very, has a lot of highs and lows and just gets very much involved, kind of taking me to my test of cantillation because it's going to stretch me vocally. But it just caught me that why was this part here so drastically changed in the cantillation. So let me try to do that for you. So we're starting right here where it starts and I was. So it's Va'ani Hayiti al Yad Hanahar Hagadol Hu Harikel, again totally changes the melody and it becomes high and low and uh, some longer notes that cause you to pause on the word. And this was put in by the group of Jewish sages called the Masoretes because they felt that there was something significant here, and it's meant to cause you to pause. It's meant to cause you to get your attention, which, unless you're speaking Hebrew, unless you're chanting Hebrew, you'd never know this is going on. So, with that little bit of motivation, I was renewed to just take a look at, what we could glean from this in the Hebrew language. But before we go and unpack that, let's go down to the Jewish sages here and see what they have to say. They got a little bit here on the first month. They relay it to the month of Nisan, uh, near the Passover and Daniel's fasting period. They talk about that. Here, one of the sages, Ibn Ezra, talks about the relation of the third year of Cyrus's reign, talks about the great river which is normally known as Euphrates. We hear that talked about. And then we see this word for the Tigris, which is in Hebrew, Tadel, and it's only mentioned like one time. So again, this is very, very interesting as we look upon this. So let's go to Bible Hub and see if we can unpack some interesting words here. And the one I want to look at, first of all, is in the end of this verse, and it's of this river, and it's in Hebrew, it's hit a deck, or I'm sorry, hit a kel, but it's translated as Tigris. So let's just unpack that and look at this word. There's many loan words in the Hebrew. And again, what they're saying, this word is probably of foreign origin. Some of these rivers are mysteriously challenging for us to identify in this day and time, especially if you happen to read things in the book of Genesis prior to the flood. You'll find that some rivers will have the same name before the flood and the same name after the flood. Um, Again, we have to realize that the flood pretty much changed all of the topography. It wiped out all of the hills and valleys and things shifted and some things flooded and there was just a great upheaval. So the rivers that existed prior to the flood, it's very doubtful that they are the same after the flood. They may have been named by Noah just because he was familiar with them, or named by his sons because they were familiar with it and happened to be in a similar area as they thought. But again, where they took off from with the ark and where the ark landed eventually. Um, was in a whole different location. And so they're just going from, oh, I remember a big river before the flood, and so I'm going to name it the same name. So it's very doubtful that they are the same rivers, obviously. So this Tigris River doesn't say much about it. Mentioned twice. Brian Driver Briggs hardly has nothing on it. But why did Daniel feel the need to mention it? So let's take a look at Jastro's Dictionary of the Targum. And what this does, what's neat about Hebrew and the Aramaic is words as they're spelled are related to one another. So you can find a book in the Hebrew dictionary and find how it's spelled. And then you can look at words that precede it that are spelled similarly and words that follow it that are spelled similarly. And the meanings will follow. You can't do that with English, but Hebrew and Aramaic are so cool. So here we come across the word for Tigris, spelled pretty much the same way as in our text. But as we look above it, in one entry, we see a word that starts with the same um, het, dalit, poof spelling, but then instead of ending with a lamed, it ends with an aleph, aleph hey, and it talks about a descendant of a thorny race, type of group of people. You look up a couple entries and you'll see the same basic spelling is the word for thorn. So what is going on here with Daniel? Um, and I was just, obviously being in the same area of the coffee shop and um, having a different background from what was displayed there, I couldn't help but think a little bit of Daniel in the midst of, is he describing his situation? Is he describing that he's in the midst of a thorny group of people who are prickly, of people who, when you interact with them, you can sometimes get bumps and bruises and scars, and that there's going to be some, when you have some interaction, you don't come out unscathed. You are affected in some way, and it's maybe painful. As you can see, I'm reading lots of emotion into this term of thorny, and all of us can relate to having been in a thorny place, in a place where, and no matter where you turn, you're getting pricked and you're getting affected by this thorny place that you're in. And I really felt this aligned so nicely with what Daniel was going through. um, he and the reason for this cantillation being um, very flowery and very strong on this area that he was there. The word for river, as we unpack this, is nahar, and again, it could be a great river, it could be any type of rivers or streams, but it's something that's flowing. If we you look at the root meaning of where words come from, has to do with more of what is happening with them. Um, in the Hebrew language, there are nouns and there are verbs. Verb is a description that most nouns are derived from this verb of something that is active, something that is happening. And then it becomes a noun to where you describe a river because you intuitively know that a river is bringing life-giving water, bringing fertility, the many different nuances of what a river is. And so here, Daniel in his position that he's in here is seeing this occurring. Was he really by a river, possibly, or was he just in a state of emotion in a state of oppression to where he was feeling something about his surroundings that were just uncomfortable and that were, out of his norm. Um, and so I think that was a very interesting concept here that possibly Daniel was going through. And it relates to where we are in our lives many times. We will remember our situation based upon the circumstances. We will have a feeling, have an emotion. If we receive some scars, I've seen people who, will hold out their arm and point to scars and say, yeah, that's when I was here and happened to fall, or that's when I was here and cut myself, or in worst cases, this is what someone did to me, and I'm bearing this scar. And I tend to think Daniel was feeling a little bit of that as he was going through his visions, realizing where he was, that he wasn't where he wanted to be. He wasn't at home with his friends and family the way it was before captivity. He wasn't in a place where the Ark of God was, where the temple of God was. He was displaced. He was, sometimes they say like a rose amongst the thorns. Well, here he was maybe a rose amongst the thorns in a thorny spot, in a place where he was letting his light shine for his service of God. He was obviously blessed in many facets, but it didn't come without great hardship and without sometimes great cost. And I like to think that maybe this is what this little portion of verse is trying to share with us. Um, some of it's conjecture, some of it's based upon, just what we're picking up from this verse. And but it does enhance our understanding. It does show us that, God is there. God is able to speak to us. God is able to find us where we are. And I believe God is able to help us in our time of need, no matter what we're going through. So if you're going through a thorny spot in your life today, uh, hopefully you gain some comfort from this, knowing that Daniel was also, but God was still with him, giving him visions, giving him great insight, blessing his efforts, even though he wasn't in the place where he thought he wanted to be. So I'll leave you with that today. Thanks so much for listening to these lessons. We'll pick up next week and go into this vision that Daniel's about to see and who's in it. So God bless you all and see you next time. Bye bye.